I need a mug sponsorship just so I never have to drink A&W again. Still good, just not good enough. What's up, guys? It is Dr. Seth, and we are back for another round of me answering your questions from my Instagram AMA. Starting with, how many cc's of tren are you currently on? Asking for research purposes. So, under normal circumstances, this kind of question always grinds my gears a little bit because it always feels like it's coming from a place of trying to say that the drugs are the only reason that a lifter is able to do what they do, and the drugs are the only reason why, Dan Green looks like he looks, or Chris Bumstead looks like he looks, or I look the way that I look, or I lift the way that I lift. And this kind of question, like getting it right now, is almost even more annoying considering what I actually am taking. And the answer is 0 cc's of tren per week, but also 0 cc's of any other anabolics, because for the past coming up on 7 months now, I have been on a fertility protocol, which means that all I got right now for me is some doctor prescribed HCG at 2500 IU twice per week, as well as some doctor prescribed FSH at 150 IU twice per week. And like right now, doing this meet, like people, it's rightfully to assume that I would be cranking stuff hard because I mean, that's what untested powerlifters usually do during a meet prep. But right now, like establishing a family, regaining fertility, that is my number one protocol. And it kind of led to this unique opportunity to test myself in a way to test, get it, haha, pun not intended, but to test myself to see what I could do and how I would be able to train and how I would respond without any extra performance enhancement supplementation stuff going on. And the results, in a way, kind of have been surprising, but kind of haven't. And like with my history of PED use, I've taken large doses before. I've taken lots of stuff. And what I noticed when I did crank very, very high levels is I never seemed to get a lot out of it in terms of strength gains, performance, etc. It always seemed to just kind of make me feel worse. It was easier to be leaner with higher dosages, but in terms of weight on the bar, it didn't really seem to help. So I was genuinely curious as to how my strength levels would respond on this protocol. And part of the surprise to me is that I am as strong as I am now, but part of the surprise is also how it's kind of felt along the way. And I think the biggest difference between being more enhanced and being hardly enhanced at all, probably less than natty based on my previous blood work, is that although I still am able to express strength very, very, very well, I've realized that I need to be much more cautious in how frequently I am going for those big pushes and how big those big pushes are. Because with more stuff, like I could, hammer a big lift and the very next week hammer a big lift, hammer a big lift. And like my safety margin was so much higher in terms of recovery. Whereas if you guys have been following the vlogs, like I've had a lot of sessions where I felt way worse than I expected because, like, based on how I felt on the day to day, I was like, I feel good. I should be good to go. I should be good to crank. And then I'd get to the gym and it was just like flat as shit. And I've learned some hard lessons along the way in regards to recovery management. And I think it's like less about not being able to do as much work, but more just not knowing how my body was reacting in the moment along this meat prep because like how I felt like how I thought I should feel based on previous experiences with all my other meat preps, like it just hasn't quite felt the same on a lot of sessions. And it took a little bit to figure out, but now that I kind of have it figured out and I am a little bit fresher and I'm letting myself recover adequately based on the supplementation, like I'm strong as shit right now and I should be not easily able to, but it's easily in the cards that I should be able to hit a all-time sleeve PR total when I'm on fractions of the amounts that I previously have been. Now, in regards to Trenbolone, I actually haven't taken Tren since 2019. And that's another one where it just seemed like, for myself at least, the juice, pun intended again, was not worth the squeeze because I never really felt any exceptional strength. I never felt like I got a huge boost out of it. I just like I just I'm already someone who is, hyper high strong, hyper intense, hyper aggressive, and I just got more of the qualities that I really don't like about myself. So like it made me angry, it made me sassy, it made me snarky. And those are things that I really don't enjoy being. And if all I really got out of the Trenbolone was, angry, snarky, sassy, and shitty sleep, I don't think it was really worth doing for me. So this has been a trend free zone for a very long time. And I think as far as the fertility protocol, that stuff is, things are looking up. So hopefully it doesn't last too long because, I like feeling, generally better around the board. But you know what? My current kind of state on, PEDs for powerlifters is that like enough to help, but any more than that, you're probably not helping yourself in the big picture, both in life and in platform performance. And the next question is thoughts on the belt squat. I've heard some very mixed opinions. Well, my first thought is that I am not at all bought into the belt squat hype. And I think that like part of that is when I was younger in the sport and kind of coming up is when belt squats kind of blew up on the scene and everyone's like, belt squats are magical, belt squats are gonna do this, belt squats are gonna do that. They're the best thing ever. You can train your legs without training your back. And I was so excited to finally get to try a belt squat. And when I finally got to try a belt squat, I was just kind of very underwhelmed and realized that for everything that people were trying to tout its benefits for, it kind of sucked. And I don't want to say that like belt squats are always useless and there's no reason to belt squat, but for the reasons that people want to belt squat, i.e., a way to build legs without taxing the back, it's definitely not the first choice that I would have for a lifter. And if I were to choose a belt squat for that purpose, I wouldn't be just squatting on it. And the reason I say that is like squatting on a belt squat, if you've never used one, the tendency of that machine is to really like almost try to pull you into the hips and the adductors. And it kind of becomes more of like a hip adductor squatty lift rather than like a quad squat. And most people that are using the belt squat, they're like the deadlift type builders that need to get more quads. And if they go on a belt squat without any real intent, they just end up kind of putting it where they're already strong and they don't tend to get a lot out of it. And if I have someone where I am trying to get more legs into their squat, more legs in the deadlift, and there's someone who wants to go to their hips already, I would way rather see them running a hack squat. I'd way rather see them running a leg press. I'd way rather see them running like a very strict Oldie style high bar squat because that's going to be much, much, much better able to direct work into the quads, which is what they need. Now, if we do have someone where like the belt squat is their only real option and they can't tolerate a ton more actual squat volume, they don't have a hack squat, they don't have a leg press, then I am okay using a belt squat as a quad builder, but I want to be very specific with our intent. And the way that I like to coach lifters to use belt squats as a quad builder is to almost like Hatfield them. And that is they're going to be holding onto it. They're going to be leaning back against their hands. And they're going to be using their hands or their arms as like a pivot to almost pull them into their quads and pull them into their knees and shove them further in. And it's kind of going to look and feel a little bit like how you would visualize a pendulum squat. And if a lifter can run a belt squat with that intent, they can make it really, really, really freaking quaddy. Now, back to what I was talking about at the beginning, how the belt squat kind of has a tendency to put a lifter into their adductors, put a lifter into their hips. I love a belt squat as a sumo deadlift leg builder because it's going to kind of put them in a really good place where they can imitate their sumo leg drive without having a ton of demand on their back. So if you're doing a belt squat specific for sumo, then I love it. Just imitate your sumo, jam out on that sucker. If you're trying to grow quads, be really specific with your intent. But if you have a hack squat, just get on the hack squat and jam out on that thing because it will be better for your leggy loos. Next question. Is slight knee pain 1 to 2 days after a heavy squat a problem? It is decreasing during that time. And I think that the short answer is that it's only going to be a problem if you allow it to become a real problem. And like right now, if your knees are sore after squatting and it goes away and you're totally fine the next squat session, in the short term and even the long term, I'm not going to be super worried about it because like feeling stiff the day after squatting, it's not the biggest deal. It's going to happen from time to time, especially if you are pushing hard. But what we don't want to do is, number one, we don't want to panic and go, ow, my knee knees hurt, I need to throw out the plan altogether. But the other thing we don't want to do is, ow, my knees hurt, let's just keep smashing my head against a wall over and over and over again until my knees explode. And the way that I like to think about pain is that pain is this indicator that we are doing more with a body part or an activity or a region or whatever than we are ready to handle in that moment. And if we continue to do more and more and more and more and kind of elevate our levels of fatigue, reduce our levels of preparedness, eventually we're going to get to a point where the scale kind of tips and it becomes an issue that we actually need to deal with. And what I want to teach lifters to do is, like, when they have these little aches and pains, is to not freak out when it comes in and not immediately stop and not immediately shut things down and panic and worry and think they're going to break, but take it as a sign that they're kind of creeping up towards the limit of preparedness. And that means we can go about it in two routes. Number one, we can make sure that we're managing our main work well and not cooking things too hard and keeping it in the pocket so we can sustain progress over a longer period of time. Number two is we can take our knees and start looking at how we can elevate their preparedness so they can be better able to handle what we are throwing at them training wise. And like easy things that we can do that can positively influence sensory tolerance, positively influence tissue tolerance, positively influence how stiff we feel after training is just bend your knees more away from the gym. Because like if you have a big squat day and then you just don't move the next day, like of course your knees are going to be stiff as shit when you try to get off the toilet. But if you have a big squat day and then you get home, you do some kneeling squats before bed, you get into some split squats, you just move the knees a little bit, do some bodyweight squats, whatever you want to do to move the knees, you're going to wake up and not feel as bad. And then if you just get to move the knees, bend the knees, get them going again, they're not going to have a chance to stiffen up because you're moving them more. The whole recovery aspect, I don't want to be like, oh, active recovery, because like active recovery, doing more work doesn't actually make it recover, but you're not giving it the opportunity to get stiff. You're not giving it the opportunity to feel shitty. Therefore, it will feel better and better and better. And because you're giving those tissues that length stimulus, that low load length, you're going to be able to positively influence their elasticity and not like let them get all stiff and shitty and clunky, and stuff is going to work better in both the short and long term for you. So to recap, it's not a problem unless you just keep hammering forward and not changing anything you're doing and just, letting the knees get stiffer and shittier and shittier and shittier and doing more work until they feel really shitty. Because if they get to the point where they feel really shitty and you have to back down, it's going to be a problem. And we want to just make sure we are proactive so we don't get to that point. Next question: spider bar versus SSB to build better brace and positioning for the squat. Now, I will preface this, I will preface this by saying that I've only ever used a real spider bar on one squat day in my entire lifetime, both being alive as a human and as a powerlifter. I have done a shit ton of SSB squatting, and I am a fan of putting like my ProLock camber bar attachments onto my SSB to kind of make what I thought would be imitating a spider bar. Now, because of my experience with my spider bar of death with the ProLock attachments, and because of everything I've heard about the spider bar, the day that I squatted on a spider bar, I expected it to feel really freaking hard and absolutely atrocious, and I was pleasantly surprised to have hit one of the heaviest actual sleeve squat I ever have in my entire life. And to make that squat even more, I don't want to say impressive, but more like, where the frick did this come from? Going into that squat session, I had my second surgery on my pec. I immediately left the hospital from that pec surgery, got to the airport, got on an airplane, flew to Columbus, Ohio, got like 4 hours of sleep 3 days in a row doing social media content for Elite at the Swiss Symposium, and then went to the training day at Elite. Didn't even bring my own belt, didn't bring my squat shoes, didn't bring my knee sleeves, so I borrowed Dave Tate's belt just so I could squat with Amber on the spider bar with some chains. Ended up working up to like 765 and 4 chains per side and just smashed the living shit out of it, like with blood gushing out of my incision because I literally just had surgery like 3 days before. And like in my head after that squat, I was like, holy shit, I am so freaking strong right now. And then getting back to Calgary and getting back to the SSB, because I was still, had no real use of this arm, didn't want to get into a straight bar. I was like, why am I so weak? Where did it go? Where did it go? Where did it go? Where did it go? And in reality, it's just that I wasn't weaker. It's just that with how low the weight sits, with the stability of the handles, with how everything loads in on the spider bar, it's like, yes, there kind of is that bit of sway, bit of swing because of the camber, but it acted like this like ultra low bar that just let me dig into the positioning where I'm really freaking strong. And I just was able to stack on top of myself and just blast that sucker up. And I think that for myself, it's like the spider bar is going to be similar to the camber bar, where it just makes it really, really, really easy on the stuff that I'm bad at and just goes right towards the stuff that I'm good at. So for myself, at least, I don't think it's going to be a very good training tool for someone who, has the same tendencies on a squat as I do. And I think in general, based on how like the camber bar kind of just or spider bar, you're able to just kind of lock in and sink in and sit down and just load into yourself. Like, if you're good at loading into yourself, like, it's probably going to be too easy to really be worth prioritizing. Whereas an SSB trying to fold the guy over and just like buck you forward, that is going to be a lot more challenging on torso and brace. But the kind of the flip side applies, where with the SSB, because it's so challenging on torso and brace, like it kind of wants to turn you into that gross C shape as you're going. It's not going to be very realistic to your squat positioning. Whereas the spider bar and even like the cambered attachments on the SSB, like they feel more like my low bar groove, which is why I like to run it. And like the camber spider attachment, because they're freaking free swinging on the SSB, that one is hard as shit. It kind of takes away the ability to load into myself as well. But I think in terms of like training tool, if I want squat practice that is specific to my low bar groove without having the shoulder whatever going on to get under the squat bar, that's when I would be using a spider bar if I had access to one, or when I'd be running the spider camber attachment thingy bobbers on my speed work. If I want to just challenge the shit out of my back and my brace, that is when I'd be using the SSB. And last question of the day, kind of similar to the knee question, but different enough that I can give a different answer and provide more context. So I want to touch on it. 2 weeks out, tendons and elbows starting to hurt. How would you approach this? And right now, sitting here, I am 2 weeks out, or I guess 16 days out, almost 2 weeks out. And dude, I am right there with you. I got shit that's sore. I got shit that's stiff. I got stuff that doesn't feel totally awesome. But the longer that I compete, the longer that I do this, the more peaks that I've done, the more I realize that at the end of prep, fatigue is going to be high. Intensity is getting ramped up so that you actually can peak for the sucker. And with that combination of high fatigue, high intensity, like, you are going to be teetering on that edge of exceeding your preparedness. And like, stuff is going to get achy, stuff is going to get sore. And the longer I've done this, the more I've realized that I really don't need to do anything about it other than not freak out, not make it a bigger problem than it needs to be, and at the same time, not cook myself harder than it need to be cooked. And then as I taper into the meet, like, the taper is just going to do its magic. The fatigue's going to come off, and then all of a sudden you get to the platform on meet day, as long as you haven't been like an asshole the last week of your prep and you're not overshooting, when you should be taking like a last warm-up something at 1 week out, and you're still moving through meet week, you're going to get on the platform, you're going to be like, holy shit, my stuff feels really, really, really freaking good. And I think that, like, I've had meets where at 2 weeks out, like, I felt totally spotless. I felt awesome. Everything was moving amazing. Like, nothing hurt at all. And those meets, my performance on the platform wasn't the greatest. And I think all I can really attribute that to is, on those meets, I really didn't push hard enough to necessitate the need to taper off fatigue. And I didn't really have any super compensation, and I didn't get the boost on the platform. And the further I get into this, the more that I'm almost like looking forward to feeling dead and being sore at the end of the meet prep, and then still finding a way to bring it and do well. And I know that if I can still find a way to bring it and do well, like I did last night on my deadlifts when I did feel pretty flat, I know that when I pull that fatigue off and I get on the platform, shit is gonna fly. So that is what I've got for today, guys. Thank you so much to everyone who asked questions, and thank you so much for everyone watching this. If you want the opportunity to ask more questions, provide more context, and get better answers, get help with your training, get feedback on your lifts, hit the link below, sign up for Team Activated to get the best powerlifting coaching around.